On the sweltering day of July 3rd, 1976, in Lahr, a small town in West Germany, an unsettling incident unfolds in a modest 4-story apartment building. Oskar Müller, a tenant, en route to the communal bathroom, he's unable to ignore the putrid stench wafting from the shared facility, a scent so repugnant it could churn stomachs. Müller pauses as he passes his neighbour, Joachim Kroll. When asked about the source of the smell, Kroll dismisses it with a shrug and an uneasy chuckle, saying it was, and quote, guts. It's a response that doesn't sit right with Müller, spurring him to investigate further. The truth he uncovers is far more grotesque than he could ever have imagined. The remains of Kroll's latest victim. Police swarmed the area, making a beeline for the apartment occupied by the seemingly harmless Uncle Joachim, as he is fondly referred to by the local children. What they discover within those walls will haunt them forever. A macabre scene of a human hand simmering in a pot alongside carrots and potatoes. His justification, he said, and quote, "Meat is expensive." The heinous acts committed by Joachim Kroll remind me of the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer and Dennis Nielsen. What adds even more tragedy to this case is that Kroll was able to evade capture for 2 decades. And this wasn't because he was some criminal mastermind. It was because innocent people were wrongly persecuted for his crimes, which allowed him to continue with his gruesome murders. Before we dive into this case, I want to let you know that I make videos weekly. So if you want to see my next video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you are new. It really helps me out. Thank you. A troubled childhood, marked by neglect and derision at the hands of family members, likely contributed to Joachim Kroll's disturbing inclinations later in life. Born in 1933, during a period when extreme right-wing politics were on the ascendancy in Germany, he struggled growing up as the youngest among 8 siblings who mocked him constantly. He was deemed the weak one of the bunch, while facing instability due to wartime conditions, culminating to shape Kroll's dark nature over time. Adding further concern is that Kroll exhibited behaviour indicative of future violent tendencies, such as frequent bedwetting and abuse towards animals. Amid the turmoil of World War II in Germany, the Krolls, like countless other families, strove for stability, but found themselves ensnared in the grip of poverty, struggling for access to fundamental necessities such as adequate food. Kroll's father, a dutiful German army soldier, served with honour until his capture as a prisoner of war by the Russian army. It's generally accepted that he lost his life during the conflict, a devastating blow to the Kroll family, who were left under the single care of their mother, with 8 children to nurture. Kroll's formative years were significantly impacted by the destructive fallout of the war, which reflected in his academic struggles. He was held back several times in school before he decided to abandon his studies at an early age. Later assessments indicated that Kroll's IQ didn't exceed 78, and it's retrospectively speculated that he faced challenges with elementary literacy skills. Due to the absence of educational opportunities and a prevailing sense of aimlessness, Kroll found employment as a farmhand. What would tragically come to light later was his concerted efforts during this period to nurture a horrifying desire for violent murders. He added that his murderous desires started when, as a teenager, he saw pigs being slaughtered and had been aroused by the sight of blood. In his youth, Kroll tried pursuing romance with a lady whose identity remains unknown. He talked about feeling uneasy and lacking confidence when conversing and engaging intimately with women, saying that he found no pleasure or success during his one encounter of intimacy with a female. He said that he should seek intimate gratification with, and quote, someone who could not complain about his performance. In early 1955, a pivotal moment happened in Kroll's life. At the age of 22, while still residing in the family home, his mother passed away, and it was at this time that his murderous reign began. Literally just 3 weeks after his mother passed, he committed his first murder. Is it plausible that this was a sinister manifestation of pent-up anger and grief? I think it's more likely that with the passing of his mother, he felt free to act upon his deviant fantasies. By 1957, Kroll relocated to Duisburg, where his sinister actions escalated. He unleashed a spree of attacks on several women. During this period, he managed to secure employment as a laboratory attendant. He eventually took residence in Lahr, a district within Duisburg. Kroll frequently ventured to the outskirts of town, often stalking through wooded areas as he saw his unsuspecting victims. On February 8th, 1955, a chilling chapter began as Kroll initiated his horrifying reign of terror. His first victim was a young woman named Irmgard Strell, who was just 19 years old. After an anxious search spanning several days, authorities discovered Irmgard's mutilated and lifeless body on February 13th in the vicinity of Waltrip. The close-knit community was thrust into a state of shock and dread as their once familiar streets were robbed of their innocence, and the residents were fearful to tread freely. From Kroll's confessions, a haunting narrative emerged, detailing the sinister events that culminated in Irmgard's tragic demise. On that ill-fated day, she was walking along the street. She had run away from home, he said. Her blonde hair was flowing, adorned in a green jacket and carrying a bag with her school materials. Her path crossed Kroll, who convinced her to venture into the woods under the ruse of a promised gift. Once secluded among the trees, his sinister intentions were unmasked as he tried to kiss her, and when faced with resistance, his aggression surged. Kroll dragged the terrifying young woman into a barn, where he unleashed a frenzy of violence, stabbing her repeatedly in the neck. As she lay on the ground, her life ebbing away, he brutally forced himself on her. In a final act of savagery, he used his flip knife to disembowel her post-mortem. Irmgard's battered and defiled body was abandoned amidst the underbrush near a road. After committing the grotesque act, Kroll returned home, where he descended further into depravity. In a pursuit of self-gratification, Kroll engaged in a macabre ritual, something he would do after his other murders. He pleasured himself with a rubber sex doll, while simultaneously choking a child's doll. In doing this, Kroll demonstrated his perversion and dangerous fusion of his violent tendencies with his twisted, intimate desires. Kroll would later claim that after his first killing, his murderous tendencies subsided until 4 years later. However, authorities believe that he is responsible for several more murders between 1955 and 1959. It is believed that during this period, he killed a minimum of 6 women. The last of these women was murdered on July 26, 1955. His victim this time was a much younger girl named Manuela Knott, who was just 16 years old. Kroll seized her, strangled her life away and discarded her body in a wooden park in Essen. In a chilling escalation of brutality, and something that would now become part of his MO, Kroll stripped the young girl of her clothing and forced himself on her. He then unsheathed his long-bladed knife and began to cut pieces of flesh from her thighs and buttocks. Moreover, he further desecrated Manuela's remains by pleasuring himself over her body, leaving fluids on her face and pubic area. There was so much fluids that it led authorities to initially speculate that a group of individuals had been involved in the attack, not just one man. Unknown to anyone at the time, Kroll had harboured darker intentions for the extracted flesh. He took it home to cook and savour, crossing into the realm of cannibalism, though he later asserted that the scarcity and expense of meat had driven him to this act. But he also chillingly admitted a morbid curiosity to experience the taste of human flesh. So although there was practicality leading him to consume flesh, there was still a desire that was also shared by other notorious cannibals, such as Albert Fish and Jeffrey Dahmer. Manuela's tragic death weighed heavy on investigators. 6 months had gone by when, unexpectedly, a breakthrough occurred as a young man stepped forward and confessed to the murder. However, the feeling of his conviction quickly shifted as he retracted his earlier admission. The justice system remained undeterred, and he was convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison. This miscarriage of justice unwittingly served as a cloak of invisibility for Kroll, who simply just watched on as others took the blame for his heinous acts. And with each new act of violence, his audacity swelled, believing that he was shielded from the consequences of his brutal murders. And to be fair, up until this point, he was right. Driven by a frenzy that was spiralling out of control, Kroll sought to adapt his strategy. He began to use public transportation to venture into remote areas where he believed the chances of encountering a solitary female were higher. The gruesome blueprint of his attacks remained largely unchanged, but an erratic pattern emerged in the timing of his murders. It's plausible that the unpredictability was either a result of Kroll's fading memory or a deliberate omission of other unknown acts of violence. Joachim Kroll's trail of terror continued relentlessly. On June 16, 1959, his malevolence descended upon Rhine, where 24-year-old Clara Frieda Tesma became his next victim. The brutality of this murder eerily mirrored that of Manuela's. Clara endured unimaginable torment before her life was extinguished, after which Kroll coldly and methodically harvested portions of her flesh for his repugnant cannibalistic desires. The fate of an innocent man, Henrik Ott, a local resident of Rhine, found himself the main suspect and was arrested for Clara's murder. The weight of wrongful accusation and the bleak prospect of a trial, where he stood accused for a crime he did not commit, pressed heavily upon him. In despair, Ott took his own life while in custody. While the innocent were crushed by misdirected justice, Joachim Kroll, the true killer responsible for the reign of terror, remained at large, free to continue his twisted atrocities. Kroll's predatory tendencies primarily targeted women, spanning across various ages. There was, however, a single deviation from this pattern. a night in 1965, when his gaze fell upon a young couple in Grossenbaum. On this night, Hermann Schmitz and his fiancée, Marion Wien, were sharing an intimate moment in the sanctuary of their car, parked in a secluded area. Unbeknownst to them, they were being observed by Kroll. As he watched them, his chilling MO that had been refined over years of terrorizing women underwent a chilling transformation. He stealthily approached the car and used his knife to puncture the tyre. This baited Hermann to get out of the car, and as soon as he did, like a viper, Kroll struck him mercilessly. Kroll stabbed him in the neck and the heart multiple times. Kroll's usual methods had been abandoned, and his attack on Hermann seemed more of a spontaneous, opportunistic act to incapacitate him so he could reach Marion. However, Marion's instincts were razor sharp. In a frantic adrenaline rush, she clambered into the driver's seat. Her hands pounded on the horn while her foot slammed down on the gas pedal. The car sped towards Kroll, nearly clipping him, who, in a panicked retreat, vanished into the shroud of the woods. Marion Wien's valiant escape attempt had granted her the opportunity to give a description of her attacker, yet his nondescript appearance yielded no tangible leads for law enforcement. Once again, Joachim Kroll slipped through the cracks, remaining at large to continue his reign of unspeakable horror. It's likely this close call with capture sent a jolt of trepidation through Kroll. He disappeared for a whole year, or at least that's what he said in his confession. But his lust for murder still remained. On September 15th, 1966, near Duisburg, the lifeless body of 20-year-old Ursula Rohling was found in the foliage. Ursula's demise bore the haunting trademarks of Kroll's violence. Her body, left in a provocative position, had been strangled, forced upon, and lay undiscovered for nearly 2 days. Just before she met her end, she had been with her fiancé, enjoying a simple ice cream. Her fiancé became the main suspect in the murder. He said that they had spent the evening together, discussing their wedding, and parted ways. He watched as she made her way towards the very park where her life was cruelly snuffed out. The emotional torment endured by Ursula's fiancé was unimaginable. Besieged by the dual agonies of profound loss and unjust accusation, he faced a relentless onslaught from the whispers of suspicion and the pressurizing interrogation of the police. This young soul, trapped in despair, sought release through a tragic course of action. He flung himself into a river, surrendering to the currents. The malevolence of Kroll's crimes not only took the life of an innocent young woman, but shattered the world of those close to her, creating ripples of devastation throughout the community. Over the course of 2 harrowing decades, Kroll's sinister campaign of terror remained erratic and unpredictable. The chilling nature of his crimes was such that there seemed to be no discernible pattern. Sometimes he would lay dormant for years, while other times his murderous impulses would intensify, taking lives of multiple women within the span of a week. Compounding the tragedy was the perversion of justice, as 5 innocent men were ensnared in the web of accusations and found guilty for the heinous deeds Kroll had committed. Their lives were shattered, tainted by the crimes they did not commit, while Kroll continued his grim reign unhindered. Further complicating matters, the era was plagued with the presence of other serial killers. The sheer volume of violent crimes overwhelmed law enforcement, spreading resources thin and adding to the challenge of capturing these predators. Kroll's twisted psyche drove him to desecrate the bodies of his victims through cannibalism, but even in this, he was grotesquely selective. In his disturbed mind, he deemed only those he considered beautiful and tender worthy of such an act. He would take the flesh from their lifeless forms, using it as a gruesome trophy, and later consuming it. Joachim Kroll's disturbing 2-decade-long crime spree reached a horrifying climax on July 3rd, 1976. On that day, 4-year-old Marion Kettner disappeared from a local park, falling into the clutches of Kroll. Deception was Kroll's second nature, and he had managed to fool not just his victims, but the entire neighbourhood he lived in. The children in the area had affectionately given him the name Uncle Joachim, a testament to his perceived kindness and generosity. His apartment was filled with toys and dolls that attracted the local children, and he always seemed to have the latest electronic gadgets on hand. He was well liked by the adults in his community as well. His sense of humour, capable of inducing laughter. This further masked his dark secrets. But behind closed doors, Kroll's sickening reality unfolded. He practiced strangling using the dolls that the neighbourhood children so innocently played with. His private collection of inflatable dolls served the same purpose, rehearsal for his horrendous acts. The mysterious disappearance of little Marion Kettner put the entire community on high alert. As part of their investigation, the police began to conduct house-to-house inquiries. Meanwhile, Kroll's neighbour, Oscar Mueller, had grown suspicious due to a persistent foul odour and the presence of unusual waste in the shared bathroom. When he approached a police officer to voice his concerns about a blocked waste pipe in their apartment building, it spurred an investigation. Knowing they were dealing with a missing child case and conscious of a string of murders in the area, they quickly called in the services of a plumber to clear the blockage. As the contents of the pipe fell into a bucket, everyone recoiled in horror. What they found was unmistakably internal organs of a child. Lung, kidneys, intestines, and a heart, along with pieces of flesh. This gruesome discovery marked the turning point in the case of Marion Kettner's disappearance, bringing the community face to face with the unspeakable crimes of Joachim Kroll. With the horrifying discovery of the child's internal organs in the waste pipe, the police immediately turned their attention to Joachim Kroll's apartment. What they found inside was a scene from a nightmare. Kroll had been cooking a hand, which was found stewing in a pot. Inside his fridge, police discovered multiple severed heads, and in his freezer, there were meticulously stored and dated prime cuts of human flesh. Without any hesitation, Kroll was taken into custody. To the astonishment of the police, he readily confessed not only to the murder of Marion Kettner, but also gave them intricate details about 13 other murders. He said there could have been more, but he could not remember, and with the amount of murder that was happening in the area at the time, it is almost impossible to know the full truth. Kroll also admitted to the sickening act of cannibalism. While in prison, Kroll showed peculiar eagerness to cooperate with the authorities. In his twisted mind, he believed that if he was helpful, he would be given some form of surgery that would miraculously cure his violent, homicidal tendencies, and he would subsequently be released from prison. After several years, Kroll was finally put on trial. He was charged with 8 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The trial was a lengthy and grueling process, lasting 151 days. In April 1982, Joachim Kroll was found guilty. His misplaced hopes for a cure were shattered when he was sentenced to life in prison. There was no redemption, no second chance for the man who took so many lives of innocent people. Kroll would never see the outside world again. He died behind bars in 1991 at aged 58 of a heart attack. That's the end of this episode. Until next time, stay sane.